Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of PixlFeed Radio. I'm here with my friend Cassandra Spencer, who is a former U.S. Army Public Affairs officer turned Facebook insider. So this is going to be good because all the people who are watching this and follow me, it's all about Facebook ads, marketing, and dealing with algorithms and all that good stuff. You actually went in there undercover and your work has generated millions and millions and millions of views in social media. And, I know from the inside, I don't work for Facebook, quote unquote, but I deal with them on a daily basis. So, I've seen things and know things that they can sit here and refuse all day long, but we all know what's going on behind the scenes. And I know people on the inside too. So, I get things here and there. But before we get into all of this, Cassandra, how did this happen? How did we go from one to being a contractor for Facebook?
So ironically, when I was a cadet, before I even commissioned into the Army, I used to get in trouble all the time for goofing off on Facebook. I had one of the oldest Facebook accounts back in 2004 when it was just a few private colleges.
Right.
Because I started off my college career at NYU. So I had been on Facebook forever, used to spend tons of time on it. And ironically, even though I got in trouble for it in college as a cadet, once I became an Army officer, they recognized my skill with social media. And that was how I ended up becoming a public affairs officer. Because one of the things public affairs officers do is, manage official social media accounts.
Right. That's, and then, you even wrote a book about it. So, you started with Facebook basically at the same time that I did, but I'm not gonna lie, I did have it in college. And then I goofed around with it. And then there was a point there where MySpace came out and it was all MySpace and I forgot about Facebook. And then all of a sudden Facebook just surpassed, MySpace. And, I'm not going to get into the whole story because I know the story and I read all the books about it and stuff like that. But it's amazing how something, and it's funny because when I saw it, when I was using it, I'm like, this is never going to beat MySpace. It's too simple. It's too basic. And man, this is the whole thing to what it is now. So now one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, obviously we're going to get into the ad side of things, but one thing that you wrote, you even wrote the book, it's called Impact, how I went behind the enemy lines in our struggle against the far left. I don't want to turn this into a far left, far right type of deal because I believe there's both extremes, but I believe there should be a middle ground of being able to voice your opinion. And I know for a fact, because I've seen it with my own eyes, how Facebook, because let's face it, people, in that area, California, it's more of a democratic left type of, I guess I could say culture. So, and I've seen internal memos of, choking, reach on quote unquote conservative accounts on purpose, just because they don't agree with the opinion. So how did you start uncovering all this? Let's get into how you really started getting into it and started seeing and covering all of it, basically.
So once I got out of the Army, I actually ended up in a contractor role at Facebook's Austin, Texas facility. So I was on site
now Texas
at Facebook.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, the Texas facility, Austin, that's the policy. Policy regulation team. What? Oh, you're still there? The video just went out on me. Okay, we can cut that out. Anyway, so that's the policy team. What else do they handle in that particular office in Austin?
And so what I was specifically handling is I was hired to help with intellectual property claims. So copyright and trademark issues.
Okay, so all right, so that's good to know too, because when it started, when I started advertising on Facebook, there was a lot of people that were selling copyright items and, without licensing and stuff like that. So how do they approach stuff like that from, from their point of view? They see, okay, people are selling, T-shirts with a Nike logo, but they're not Nike. How is that handled? What's their approach on that?
They're pretty good. They have that would almost fall under counterfeit, where if they're selling counterfeit Nike goods, that was a whole nother section of the copyright, trademark, intellectual property section, where we dealt with, counterfeit luxury goods, things of that nature. But like you said, not being political, my job was not inherently political. It should not have been political. I would just handle thousands of copyright trademark claims a day, everything from, the bulk of it were things like, oh, you're illegally streaming a Disney movie, that needs to come down, or you're, live streaming Game of Thrones, to things like, oh, someone is stealing a photographer's work, right? An independent photographer, and posting the pictures without that photographer's permission. And so it would be run the gamut of things. I mean, everything from, I remember literally the first ticket I ever dealt with was feet pictures.
Out of all the things in the world, that's
Yeah,
the main thing you were dealing with right away.
Yeah, the first ticket I ever got was feet pictures. I'm not even exaggerating.
Well, people don't realize, like, they don't think about it, I should say. It's how much stuff gets uploaded to Facebook on a daily basis, and an hour, any given hour, and then some horrible stuff that people upload on there, and now the AI takes care of it, but there's still human beings having to look at all this stuff, and I can't even imagine the psychological damage that it does to a human being, seeing the most horrible stuff in the world all day long. Did you have to take a look at anything like that, or was it just like mild stuff like that, I guess you could call it?
Well, in the queue that I was in, I should not have run into those things, but every once in a while you would end up with something that really belonged in like the extremist content queue, or something, terrorist content queue, that would accidentally end up in, what I was seeing. And so, yeah, I saw some pretty grotesque, terrible, awful, disgusting things. And, luckily it wasn't fairly often, and I had been in the military, so I was a little bit desensitized at that, and just being on the internet, since the mid 90s.
Yeah,
The internet, you see a lot of things.
yeah, we've seen a lot of things growing up with the internet. So there's a few sites out there. I'm not going to get into it, but so as you started working with it, how was it that you started, seeing, that the reach was being controlled one way or the other? How did you started getting the hint of it while you were working there? Like, when did it hit you?
So one day I was just, going through doing my job, and I had a ticket from like a small, conservative leaning outlet, copyright ticket. Um, and so in order to evaluate the claim, I would look at the back end of both the page that was making the claim, as well as where the potentially violating content was. And so I noticed when I was looking at this conservative page that there was an odd note in the account section. The same place where if I had left a copyright strike, it would say, copyright strike done by Cassandra Spencer, user notified, right? And it said IA live action deboost live distribution. And, I was like, I'm not a programmer, but I can get the gist of what they're trying to do with that. And it says user not notified, right? So this is something that's being done without the user's knowledge.
So this is on the back end, obviously, like your own
Yes.
program. So I love how they call it deboost.
Yeah.
So basically, it's up to you to call it, and obviously you're being tracked too, I'm assuming, because it's Facebook. So, like, would you get in trouble if you didn't? How does that work?
Well, and so I just noticed it on the account, and I just went in and processed the copyright claim. And the first time I saw it, I just kind of decided to let it go, as like, okay, well, that was weird, And what happened was, over the course of time, I kept seeing it pop up again and again and again on specific types of pages. And so I noticed that it was a pattern, and I said, this is all being done without the user's knowledge. Some of these, accounts, like larger accounts, like for instance, Louder with Crowder or the Daily Caller, which are fairly large people, they spend a lot of money on Facebook ads, and there are actions being taken on their account that's reducing their reach without their knowledge.
You're talking about advertising accounts or regular fan page, or the actual pages?
Well, the page, but the page spends money to advertise, right?
Right. I mean, the page is attached to that account that you're using, so it chokes the ads themselves. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know that it would choke the ads, but it would choke it was specifically dealing with the live videos. So let's say, like Steven Crowder, he has like a podcast, live show. It was choking the reach of his live feeds.
Wow, that's so interesting. I mean, obviously we know that they can do that, but And how long? Okay, so once you started seeing that pattern, and you saw that it was only going one way, did you confide on anyone that you work with or friends? When did it hit you like, hey, there's something going on in here? Maybe I should talk to somebody about it.
Well, and that is one of the problems with Facebook is, I used to be in the US Army. If there was something that I saw that I thought was wrong or ethically wrong, there is like a chain of command. There are many different ways that you can like bring up your concerns, right? Especially as a contractor at Facebook, the attitude is very much, it's not your problem, just do your job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you're an advertiser like myself who spent millions of dollars between client accounts and my own money, and then something goes down and no one gets back to you. It's like, no, we'll get to it at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's so frustrating because, and it's kind of, you can't talk to anybody. I mean, I can now have an assigned rep that I can reach out by email, but there's so many advertisers. There's so many small pop and pop businesses. So that's when the whole iOS 14, I don't know if you're familiar with it, where Apple's going to, stop all tracking. Facebook's rolling out a campaign talking, it's like, hey, you're hurting the little guys that we care so much about. And it's like, dude, you don't care about the little guys. There's not even support for the little guys. You got to spend millions I'm talking about millions just to get an assigned rep to your accounts or agency. It's insane.
Oh, yeah. And those are things that we could see on the back end is we could see, how much they had spent, whether they had an assigned ad rep or not. And it became like, and some of these pages were ones that had assigned ad reps to them. And so I'm like, this is really like wrong. I mean, this is wrong on so many levels. And so that was what led me to eventually, I ended up going to Project Veritas because I was like, listen, they have a platform and they had put out a thing where if you're on the inside of these companies and you see anything, to reach out to the tip line. And so that was kind of how I got started with that.
So when you started reaching out to people in the inside, if they didn't agree with you, politically, or if they were leaning one, the other way, how did that work when you went up to them? What would they say, when you actually talked to somebody about it that worked there?
If I brought it up to my supervisor, it would just be like, oh, well, that doesn't really have to do with copyright or trademark, so just ignore it. So it's like
it's just, I'm laughing because it just makes so much sense because I've dealt with Facebook with so many things, and then you get the canned response that sometimes comes in as code, and it's just like, it's a canned response. So it's that somebody just hitting a button, or is it
is AI? Literally, I've hit many a button where it's like option 1, option 2.
I mean, I've gotten so many ad accounts banned for no reason, just because the AI flagged it, for some reason or another. And before I had a rep, I would literally had to sit there and appeal the ad account, and I would just get that canned response. And people give up because they don't have the patience to deal with it. But I just kept appealing it every time until somebody woke up in a good mood that day and said, okay, you're fine, good to go. That's what drives me insane. And that's when I learned quickly, because the first couple of times it happened, I thought I was a big shot because I spent like $100,000 in a month, not thinking once I started dealing with real accounts, like how much money people spend. And then once I'm like, I was a dick. I was like, this is ridiculous. Yeah, I will go off because I was frustrated. You're messing with my livelihood. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I will go off on these emails. And then I learned very quickly that, people who are seeing this probably get emails like, messages like that daily. So maybe if I play nice, I get my account back. And sure enough, I just started being super nice about it every time it happened. And then eventually, I got my own personal rep. But I mean, I know so many people. Like, I lost my business manager for 3 months, and it had 47 accounts running in it. Like, could you imagine that? Like, going into your clients and be like, I don't have access to your stuff. I was freaking out, and the accounts are still spending. That's the crazy part about it.
Yep. So they still take your money.
Oh yeah, all day long. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. So what once you talk to the supervisors and all that, did they keep just blowing it off, or did at some point did it scale to somebody else? How did it go from there?
No, I mean, that's the thing, is it was very clear that they had no interest and no curiosity as to what was going on. And so that's why I went outside. I went to the media, is because nothing was going to happen at Facebook. It's very, very clear just from the company culture and just how everything was. Nobody was going to do anything internally, especially if a contractor is raising this, concern. I'm a nobody at this company. So nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to listen. And so, yeah, I went to the media.
And what year was this?
2017, 2018.
Okay, so it wasn't too far back. Okay, so who did you reach out to first in the media?
Project Veritas.
And when you came to them with the news, obviously everybody loves good, bad news about Facebook because it's like, let's pick on them always, because everybody hates Suggs for some reason. So I'm sure they jumped all over it. Did they do an investigation? How did it go from there?
So Project Veritas is an undercover journalist organization. And recently I was actually the first whistleblower who came to them, someone from the inside. Before, all their investigations were undercover things where they would get employees, discussing things on hidden camera. And so when I went to them, I started, I turned over all this documentation because I started, actually like screenshotting things and sending them over, proof of what I was saying.
You were taking screenshots while you were inside?
Yes.
Like with like a phone, like with your phone taking a picture, or like actual doing screenshots on the computer?
Not on the work computer, no. But I had like a separate, burner phone, and because I knew that they could see, and I knew that I was playing a dangerous game. Listen, it's like I know that they can see, especially because once I started noticing this pattern, then you want to see, well, what else is going on that I don't know about, right? And then you just end up going down the rabbit hole and finding policy documents and internal conversations about what they're doing and all this kind of stuff.
Because to communicate, well, you're a contractor, but I know for a fact that Facebook, to communicate internally, they use Facebook Work or whatever it's called.
Yeah,
and
Workplace.
Workplace, yeah, that's it. And one of the major issues with the ad platforms and everything on the back end, like the ad platform is broken like every other day. Like before you're an Apple, it's just a nightmare. It's never consistent. And from what I've heard from actual engineers that worked there in the past, is that that's how they communicate to Facebook Workplace. And the issue is there's no real leadership on getting projects done. It's just like, here's an open ticket, and then everybody just jumps on it, and they're talking like they're talking on real Facebook. And it's just like there's no communication. That's like, it's crazy from what I understand. It's just like, here's an open ticket. I guess I'll jump on it and do something with it just to show, what do you call it? To show that I'm doing the work I'm supposed to do for my salary, right? And that's why like it's all over the place all the time. Did you get to see any of that on your end?
No, not so much on my end. Just because, like I said, the contractor team was very we were at the Facebook facility. If you walked into where my team sat, you wouldn't have known that we weren't actual Facebook employees, right? It looks just the same as every other part of Facebook. But we didn't use so much, like we used Workplace for different things, but it was very the idea of stay in your lane. You are here to do copyright and trademark. Do not veer outside of that. And you're a contractor. So I get where the contract company was coming with that. But for me, as the type of person I am, if I see something else going on, I have to say something about it.
So obviously this company, Project Veritas, once they started finding out the information, I'm assuming did Facebook find out about what you were doing before they went public with it, or after they went public with it?
So I was fired. I was actually stuck in a room, interrogated for nearly 2 hours. They tried to demand to see my personal cell phone, which I refused to do.
No, cell phone, no.
Yeah, and so after 2 hours of this circular conversation with them, and I was like, listen, because if they had looked at my personal cell phone, there wasn't anything on there anyway. That was damning. The only thing that I could have thought that they would have wanted to see my cell phone for is, so the timing of when I got fired, 2 days prior, Project Veritas released their first big tech story, which was an undercover investigation into Twitter. And this is 2 days before I was let go, which makes me think that they went and they cross-referenced. James O'Keefe is the founder of Project Veritas. They cross-referenced to see anybody who had been working at the company who had had contact with James O'Keefe. because obviously they have his cell phone number because he's got two-factor authentication on his account, just like everybody else. And so literally his and I's text messages on my personal phone, the entire conversation, it was a couple Happy New Year's texts. And like he sent me a selfie from some party he was at, and I sent him a picture of me holding a baby goat at my aunt's house. that was the incriminating thing on that cell phone, had they actually looked at my phone. Because I asked them, I said, well, if I let you look at my phone, am I going to keep my job? And they said no. Then I was like, no.
Well, I would have been like, it's my phone. Like, I don't have to show you my phone. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not the way how this works. That's crazy. That's crazy. So once, man, this is so crazy. But I'm honestly not shocked because
well, it gets crazier. So 2 hours of this goes by, and I finally say, listen, this conversation's not going anywhere. Can I leave? And their response, and I will never ever forget this, is, well, legally we can't detain you. I was like, I had been in the Army, like in intelligence, and I was like, are you kidding me? Legally you can't detain? No kidding, legally you can't detain me. And so, I get escorted out by security. They won't even let me go to my desk to clear out my desk. For 2 weeks, I have to argue with the contract company, just trying to get my personal belongings from my desk back. I have to threaten to call the Austin Police Department on Facebook because they will not return my property to me. Like, I'm talking pictures of my kid, like some headphones, like little knickknacks at my desk.
Yeah, but at that point, it's the contractor. It's not even Facebook, right?
Well, yeah, but obviously Facebook has to let me into the facility. And so the contract company hadn't done anything. Facebook hadn't done anything. So I had to threaten to call the police to get my stuff back because my belongings are hostage in a Facebook facility.
That is insanity. So, you left, and then I'm assuming that everything it's going public at this point, right?
No. And so Project Veritas, they actually do a lot of due diligence, and there was a lot of things that happened along the way because they wanted to be sure. They had never had a whistleblower come to them before. They had never had someone come from the inside until I had. And so we actually ended up releasing the story March 20 of 19. So nearly a year later is when we published the story. And in that time, I ended up becoming a full-time undercover journalist eventually.
That's pretty cool. Hey, you pretty much did the job before they hired you to do it, right? So,
well, yeah, and that's the thing is I did not go into that job at Facebook. Like Business Insider actually had to issue a retraction in an article they wrote about me. They claimed that I had been a plant from Project Veritas, and I was like, yeah, right. I was like, I ended up on food stamps for a few weeks because I was so broke because I lost my job. Mind you, it was a few weeks because I went out and found another job, but. It was hairy for a little bit.
So, and once that everything goes public, how did that change your life after it became public? Did you get people reaching out to you, or Facebook itself? How did that go when it went full blown public?
So when that went public, we never released my identity when I worked at Project Veritas because I was still working undercover. I ended up doing undercover investigations into Google. I was undercover in a lot of political campaigns. And so we never released my identity, even by the time I left Project Veritas in the beginning of 2020. If you fast forward to the summer, and I talk about this at the very end of the book, and it was one of the reasons why I decided to publish a book about my experience, was all of a sudden, somehow my identity got leaked to the media, and I had all these journalists calling me. I had people stalking me outside my house for months, and it was crazy. So yeah, my life completely changed, and I realized that the idea that even after I had stopped working at Project Veritas, that my life was going to go back to normal, that was no longer an option for me.
I can't even imagine dealing with that. So what did you do? So from Facebook, and then when you went to do an investigation with Google, was it in the same type of thing with just seeing if they're killing the reach for certain sites or whatever?
Well, what was interesting is that so we used my story to kind of launch the Project Veritas whistleblower program, and since then they've had whistleblowers not just from tech, but from media. In fact, there was one that went really viral. There was a leaked tape of Amy Robach from ABC News talking about how ABC News had spiked the Jeffrey Epstein story. A whistleblower actually brought that to Project Veritas, a hot mic video of the anchors talking about how the news station had spiked the Jeffrey Epstein story. And so we've had whistleblowers from all sorts of industries come as a result of the beginning of this whistleblower program.
What do you mean by spiking the story?
So they basically buried the story. They had the Jeffrey Epstein story, years before it became like a big thing, and ABC News suppressed the story.
So what's your take? What's your take now that everything's sticking in my head? When you're working for that company who are contractors and you're in the same building as Facebook, I'm sure you're talking to people all day long and all that from both sides. What is your take on all the data with Facebook? Because I know as an advertiser myself, I can see pools of data, meaning like the interests that you're into, what, I can target you based on your income bracket or where you live or, what books you're into, what movies you're into and stuff like that. Did you ever overhear conversations about people misusing the data on the inside themselves or having access to it? Like saying I can get Christian's specific data just by logging into his account on the back end. Anything like that? Or was it all pretty much shut down?
I think they were fairly good, at least with the contractors, about policing that. Like, unless you had a ticket that involved those accounts, you weren't supposed to be looking at other accounts that, you didn't have a associated ticket with. In fact, one of the most common reasons that people would get fired from these teams that I worked on is like, let's say Jessica goes and looks at her ex-boyfriend's Facebook account and goes through his private messages. That was probably the most common reason that people would get fired.
Oh, back then you could actually read the messages. See, I always tell people, I'm like, don't say anything on Messenger or WhatsApp. You don't want anybody reading.
It's like the least secure at the time. And I think they've changed it since then. Instagram, even if you didn't want to look at the back end and look at someone's Instagram DMs, it would pop up just when you looked at the account, like on the back end tool, the DMs. And so I saw so many people's dick pics. And I don't want to see that. Like, I'm there trying to evaluate a copyright claim, but yeah, now I just saw your dick pics. Thanks.
Here's my thing though. Like, I mean, I don't know Zuckerberg personally, obviously, or Sheryl Sandberg or any of those people, but I mean, managing Facebook as a company, it has to be tough. Like, people don't think about that. It's not the little company when Zuck started in his dorm and it just grew slowly. And it's a freaking country with its own economy. He's running basically a country of its own.
Well, yeah, my former employer actually just released an undercover tape of a Facebook executive saying exactly that Facebook is a country and that Zuckerberg is essentially the king of 2 billion people now.
Yeah, I mean, they can control everything you see and don't see. That's what's crazy about it. But it's I call it the evil empire at this point. Like for personal reasons, I mean, I still use Facebook. Like I'll post a meme or whatever, like pictures, for my family and all that, and friends. But I'm not a heavy user like I used to be. And it's not because I'm afraid of data or anything like that. Listen, they have all my data since college. So it's like, what else are they going to get access to at this point? But it's just, I feel like it doesn't have the same pull that it did before. But then I see everything that I'm working on. Like most people don't even know there's a beta that's been going on for years now of a virtual reality world, like, Ready Player One. That's the next move for Facebook. So it's like, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So people sit here and hate on it all day long, but they still use it. That's what's crazy about it.
And, from my perspective of, kind of where my social goals are and, what I do now is I encourage people to not, coming from a conservative perspective, even though there is a lot of censorship issues and whatnot with Facebook, I encourage people to stay on the platform because I think that when people isolate themselves, that actually ends up breeding more extremism and it forces people into these kind of radical circles. Whereas if, I think the solution to bad speech is more speech. And so I actually encourage people to not isolate themselves into, strange corners of the internet. That's just my perspective.
With you started to see that the censorship was leaning one way. And, the way the algorithms work, and it's Google does the same thing. TikTok does the same thing. Snap does the same thing. It's based on what you like. That's what it's going to keep showing you, right? So if you watch one of my videos on my YouTube channel, you're going to get suggestions for my videos all day long. Or, if you like something that's Democrat or Republican, then your feed's going to change to keep you, that's how they make their money, engagement. They want to keep you on the platform for as long as they can. So if you're into, I don't know, like football, you're going to see football stuff all day long. So it's the same with like political stuff and conspiracy theories, and that's how they get out of control, because people get in these little bubbles, and that's all they see everywhere they go on Facebook, YouTube, Google, and I think that's a big issue, in that you saw firsthand where it should just be not control at all. I don't think any human being should have the choice of pressing a button and quote unquote deboost a page. It should be like the algo should be like whatever the person's into. Let's say Democrat and Republican, it should be 50% of this, 50% of that, regardless of the engagement. But of course, they're not looking at it that way. They're looking at it as like, well, if this person spends, if we lose them for 10 seconds year over year, that's X amount of millions of dollars we lose on advertising. So that's the issue.
Well, and there's that, but there's also very much a social kind of control angle and political power that's associated. Because Google was like one of the biggest contributors as far as money to some of these elections coming in. And so there's a lot of money on both sides of the aisle that's being pumped in by these tech companies like Facebook, like Google. And I think it becomes a major issue because they do have the ability to sway elections.
They really do. Listen, I know what I'm capable of with ads. And I mean, if you give me a political account, I can definitely brainwash into voting for that person.
Right.
I can just set up a campaign that follows you everywhere, and then set off videos, that tell a story throughout like 30 different touch points that agree with whatever it is that you believe in. And that's what they're doing. That's how Trump won. That's a big part of how Trump won. It wasn't only that people wanted something different, at the time or whatever, but Trump spent the most on political ads than everyone, than Hillary. Like it was I don't remember the numbers top of my head, but I remember seeing it at the spend, and it was ridiculous amount of millions of dollars. And the people who ran his campaign were excellent at it too. So it's very powerful. You can certainly persuade people's opinions and votes by using the ad platform the right way, or even just organic reach. That's the other thing. That's a big issue. The other big issue that we have with, especially with Facebook, it's like you can get, other countries to come in there, start a page, and just start posting memes left or right, and it's a campaign to psychological warfare essentially, and people believe anything they see online, which is crazy to me.
Well, and we're seeing foreign countries going in there and like intentionally trying to sow division amongst Americans because it creates discord in our country. I think we see a lot of that coming from several different foreign powers, not just one. But it is a psychological warfare, because if Americans are at each other's throats and everything like that, they're not focusing on, outsider threats.
Yeah, I tell my friends, I'm like, do I follow politics? Yeah, to a point, but I'm not one of those people that sits there and follows politics all day long. I'm like, listen, I have no control of whatever happens to whoever's in charge there. I can vote, and that's pretty much it. And after that's done, what's the point of me like being obsessed with it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Like,
right.
People, the amount of energy people waste on that, and it's just like, you got to look at both sides. But again, these algorithms just pull them in and just keep showing the same thing, and it reaffirms their thoughts and what they believe in. And it's just like it's brainwashing, essentially. Listen, my kid's a year and a half old. He's nowhere near allowed a phone unless I show it to him. I show him something, but he's definitely not going to be one of those phone or tablet kids that's going to be babysat with a phone or a tablet or all that, because I know the damage that can be done just with the dopamine hits and all that. Eventually, obviously, he's going to have a phone. But I don't know how I'm gonna deal with it later on. Like, do you have kids?
I do. It's a little bit of a messy, sticky situation that I do go into in my book, because this book is very much not like an analytical look at Facebook and things like that. This book is very much my personal story of somebody who ended up making headlines by doing this, why I did what I did, why I continue to do the work that I do now. It's very much my personal journey of, how I got there, why I made certain decisions along the way, and some of the, undercover adventures that I had.
Yeah, and I read it already. I'm halfway through it, and the first chapter sucks you in right away. So I mean, go get it. It's on Amazon. But before we go, because we're out of time, before we go, for those that still have Facebook, still have Instagram, if you had to put a message out there of everything you've seen and done and the future that's coming to us, what would be the best advice that you could give them?
The best advice that I would give people is to advocate, continue to be on social media, continue to converse with each other, because I think that ultimately does lead to a better society. I would say that's one big message. And to two, realize the influence that these companies have in your life. And it's not just, oh, it's just Facebook, oh, it's just Twitter. It does have very serious real world ramifications on business, on politics, and every aspect of our lives.
That is the best advice that you can give people out there. Cassandra, thank you so much for coming on. If you guys want to get her book, it's called Impact. It's on Amazon. We're going to have the links in the description below. Where else can everybody find you, Cassandra?
I'm on pretty much every social media platform available, whether it be the kind of smaller alternative ones. I'm on Facebook. Ironically,
I was going to say, you still have
I'm
a
banned
Facebook
from the
account?
facility. I am banned from Facebook facility, even though I'm still allowed on the website. But Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, I'm on all of them. If you just look me up.
Yeah, I'll put all the links in the description. We'll have them all in there. Well, Cassandra, thank you so much for coming on. And then until next time, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.